hearty and maybe lean, but hearty moving forward. And we have Julie and Erica who led the discussion last time, and we kind of pitch hitted, or they pitch hitted because of what was going on at the national level. But today I'm going to give the microphone. Here comes Kate. Yeah, there we go. And so I'm going to give them the ability to just tell us what we're going to do today. And as people come, Rodney or I'll let them in. So I don't know who's planning to start. Is it Julie or Erica?
Well, I'm going to do sort of a centering exercise for everyone, and then I'll pass it on to Julie. So since we're going to get started, just want to take a moment to center ourselves so that we can be fully present for this meeting. So if you want to close your eyes, if you're comfortable doing so, or it's fine to keep your eyes open, but maybe just gaze downward. And then we're just going to focus for about 1 minute on our breathing. And if you get distracted, just redirect your attention back to your breathing. Okay, if we can just come back, you might want to start a little bit of movement in your feet or your hands. If you had your eyes closed, you can slowly open your eyes. Hopefully that'll bring everybody here and present for the meeting that we have today. And so I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Julie.
Hi, I'm going to, one thing we decided last week, and I think it's really, we should always remember that who is here today is supposed to be here. So I think we can focus on that. Now I want to make sure, are y'all looking at look at systems in place? For some reason, it's not showing me what you're seeing. So that's fun. Let's see. Okay, well, I'll just trust that you can, are you seeing my whole? All right, so
we see it, Julie.
Okay.
I see
it. Is it the only thing on your screen? Because I'm seeing like all the background stuff, so it's kind of distracting. But it's funny how, as you kind of take on this, you start to see things happen around the world around you. You just keep collecting information. And I was in an amazing training from mentors at their national conference, not last week, but the week before that. And they had a man talk about kind of where white supremacy shows up in mentoring. And as y'all know, mentoring is really like the worst place for it to show up. And it's really, I think, kind of something that's on here, that's not on here, but probably should be, is kind of the helper, helpee, like I'm the help on this white supremacist side, is I'm the helper, you're the helpee. Let's don't ever forget that relationship. And so, and kind of how that really can break a mentoring experience. And so it was just really, this was really powerful to me. And I found that when it's really pushed myself to shift into this and to really think through this other side. And I'll tell you, I had a meeting with my neighbors, a kind of issue, and I got out my flip chart and I basically went through kind of these things, and I was like, this is how we're going to behave. And it was interesting because in this meeting, one of the things that came up was, we literally spent, because like white people will say over here on the white, on this side, well, this is just the way it is. Like I know when I was talking to my husband and I was expressing my frustration and I used a cuss word, I would say, he was like, well, no, we don't need to be cussing, which is completely acceptance of formal over allowing ones to express their opinion. And I mean, I think there's a place to not be violent, but I think there is this other. But and so this meeting, you know, we're all over here on this side, and yet we had a big debate about the language and who and how the language was interpreted. I mean, we were just really having this whole debate about it, but we didn't center that. We didn't go ahead and acknowledge it. And I just kept saying, remember my sign over here on my sign. But I mean, the same thing is kind of the trauma that people have affected, the hurt that that had happened in the past, the historic kept coming back up. And until I love about this is just really it centers the things that are effective to move us forward versus the other side, which kind of is how we can keep the control of where we are. So I just wanted to kind of present this, and then Erica, you know, I'm going to kind of throw it to Erica to really help us learn how to be more on the right side and kind of think about how we can move our organizations to the right as we wake up to the different sides.
Well, thank you, Julie. I think why what Julie has presented is so important is if we just take a step back and think about philanthropy in general, whether you're a grant-making organization, whether you're a nonprofit, or whether you're a third party that is working within the philanthropic sector, you come to realize that the leadership of the sector is like leadership of the for-profit sector. It's overwhelmingly white at the leadership of the organizations, but also the leadership of the board of directors. And so the question then becomes, how do you move from maybe this more Eurocentric sort of frame of mind to where you're centering or bringing about BIPOC people to help you to move into the place that you want to go, which is more diverse, more equitable, more inclusive. And so I think what Julie has shown us pairs really well with one of the questions that Heather had asked us after she did the two meetings with us directly. And it was a homework exercise, but I don't know that we ever really, as a group, came back together and said, okay, what did we find out about this? But it goes to the reality of our sector and who's leading the sector, who's making the decisions within the sector as we try to do this work. And the question is, what dynamics get in the way of white-led organizations truly taking leadership and supporting the racial equity objectives and the work of BIPOC leaders and organizations? So the reality is,
Can you
I'm
say
sorry.
that? Can you state that one more time? Just kind
Sure.
Of, so we all kind of note
Sure.
that.
So the question is, what dynamics get in the way of white-led organizations truly taking leadership and supporting the racial equity objectives or the work of BIPOC leaders and organizations? Because the other thing I forgot to say was, so that you have all of these grant-making organizations and nonprofit organizations in place, the majority of which are led by white people. And then the reason why that is so important, then the reverse of that is that you only have maybe between 7 to 8% of monies going to BIPOC-led or BIPOC-serving organizations. So there is a result of what's in place. And if we're all saying that we want to be more equitable, we want to acknowledge racial justice, then being able to answer this question becomes really, really important. So, and I think that that's a way for us to start the conversation today, see where organizations are within the graph that Heather had shown us, whether it's Wake Up, I can't remember the other 4.
I can find it.
Wake up,
Catch up, wake up, catch up, show up,
show up, and then there's a 4th one,
Clean up.
clean
clean
up.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some organizations might really just be at that wake up stage. And I think that wake up stage is a little bit of this, how to get the white leadership to maybe wake up. And then there might be some other organizations farther down the line. But I do think it's important for us to have that conversation that if you're in an organization where you're not leadership, and you realize because you're out in the communities how important it is, then how do you get leadership to understand that this is important? And not only important because it's a good thing to do or the right thing to do, but it's important if you're really wanting to meet your mission. And in philanthropy, our mission is to improve society. So how can you do that if you're not accepting a big piece of that? So I don't know how many people have come in, and I don't know if we have enough to break into breakout sessions.
Definitely have enough there, at least 10 from the group online. So I think we have enough for 2 groups.
Okay.
So Rodney, I would do your breakout. You ready to go into, do you want to state the question one more time?
Yeah. It is what dynamics get in the way of white-led organizations truly taking leadership and supporting the racial equity objectives and work of BIPOC leaders and organizations? And I'll also type the question in the chat box as well.
Great, thanks.
All
I'm
right.
taking a picture of this great descriptor that Julia's provided so that we have that for the groups. So if
Yeah,
others need to have a photo or take that image of it.
I mean, I would say this is a bit of a cheat sheet to kind of think about what, because these are a lot of the things that get into the way of doing that. And how do we break from that? I don't think that, I mean, for me, I can't break from it to do these others until I center the BIPOC community, the QT community, until I center others who are comfortable, who've experienced otherness in a way that they're really able to be mindful about the system and to fix it, because because my experience in the system keeps pulling me back to this other side, to the left side, I find. And so, I mean, to me, that's why it's kind of interesting, but I really am, and I think it's, as you start thinking about it, there are little ways of like, that we use to keep from going from one side to the other. And how do we start to say as groups, okay, no, who's handling the history on this conversation? How are we going to be sent? How are we going to understand the trauma that's impacted in the past that's about this situation? How are we going to meet people where they're at? I mean, I think that those are, anyway, I don't want to cheat. So let's go into the breakouts and kind of discuss this.
Okay, and here we go. Uh-oh, did it work? Okay. Debbie, are you in a room?
I'm not, yeah, there you go.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure, why is everyone going to room 2? That's weird.
I don't know. Randy, you might
Yeah,
need
I'm not sure what you did, Rodney. You put Debbie in a room, me in a room, and you in a room, and everybody else in one room. I think you just did it backwards.
You're learning.
Yeah, it's all right. Oh, let me pause this recording.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We were in the middle of an amazing conversation, and I'm so embarrassed that I did this. Is it Kaylee?
It's Kayla.
Kayla, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I'm having a blank, and I'm really, so I want Kayla to finish because she was just like laying it all out and kind of giving it to us right there. And I don't want to shut that down. Do you mind being on the spot for a minute? You're just
No, I don't mind. I don't know that I was saying anything that was laying it all out, but I just wanted to offer that sometimes, I think we walk into spaces and we know when we're in engaging folks who we know are kind of oppositional to what we feel are to the progress that we're trying to make. But then there's as a person of color, sometimes I witness a false sense of security from folks who are committed to this work, who are committed to improving, who do the trainings, who learn new language, who learn new concepts, and they can use those things and they can talk about making space for other folks or amplifying voices. But at the same time, it's like they can also be ambivalent to the ways that they're still showing up. And there's a false sense of security tied to that because I'm doing the work, because I understand these concepts, now I'm checking boxes, now I'm using the language, but I'm not actually hearing the people of color in my organization. And not only am I not hearing them, I'm not hearing their silence because I'm not paying attention to what they're not saying or how I may be showing up in ways that like force them into discomfort or into places where they don't feel like because of power dynamics, I can speak. And so I think one of the things that I've noticed, just as progressive as we are, as like trailblazing in a lot of ways that we are, is that sometimes there seems to be like a false sense of security because I can say the things and I know the things that it leads me to feel like I am. Sometimes it feels a little performative.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, to me, what's interesting about that is that is part of the whole white supremacy system is performative. It's all performative because the truth of the matter is you have to let go of everything to be white. So you have to kind of take on this new, like you want these rights. So you got to give up who you are to kind of take on this other thing. And so you are performing your whiteness. It's always performative. And so letting go of that performative is really super hard. It's amazing how that just gets into one's system. So I really appreciate you calling that out. So Erica, how did you got a little taste of the great conversation we were having. So how about y'all? What were some of the things that y'all were talking about?
Yeah, we were talking about, and just to go back with what you were saying, I think what the problem is that what we're talking about is a shift in the power dynamics, and that the people in power rarely, if ever, want to give that power up. And when we talk about racial equity, racial justice, it feels like that means that we need to give up power, that white people need to give up power in order for other people to get it. And so that's sort of where the resistance, I think, comes from, because you have that dynamic. But anyway, my group, we had a really good conversation about ways in which to move leadership, even if they're not quite ready to do some work within the racial equity space. And while we acknowledge that this really is a top down, that you can't do the real racial equity work at an organization if leadership is not with you on that, what are some of the ways that the staff and individuals can maybe help leadership to see that this is something that needs to be done, and start to make that process happen? Because as an individual, you can't bring your full self to an organization when you think that your voice is not being heard. So we just talked about different ways, and other people from the group, please jump in because I'm sure I'm missing something, but we had a conversation around that.
What were some of the ways y'all came up with? That sounds really interesting.
Well, I don't want to be the only one talking.
All right.
So I'm going to throw it out there to see if anyone else in my group wants to take that question.
I mean, one way we talked about was operating
sort of informally, like doing some internal organizational organizing on the part of staff. So sort of again doing that like bottom up approach. So we talked about how a lot of organizations have some form informal sort of working groups within their organizations, and that can be an opportunity for lower level staff or like non-leadership team members to voice their interest in addressing these like inequitable racial dynamics or policies within the organization. And bringing that to leadership through those groups. So it provides sort of a safe space for particular individuals who have those opinions that might perceive some sort of threat from bringing them to leadership, to be able to bring them, raise those issues without feeling like they could be targeted. But it also motivates leadership to address those issues, because there is that sort of power in numbers thing. So if you have a group of the culture team bringing forward this issue, and that culture team is 10-15% of the organization, it's harder for leadership to just ignore those issues that they're raising.
How much does SC Together do, or Together SC do with, I mean, I see a lot of work for leaders, but is there space for kind of the field work, the people that are out in the, they're doing the work, like, kind of, or is there a kind of gathering spot? Because I think sometimes, that's a great option, but if you're kind of the one of 3 people in your organization, that can be really hard. And I think we've seen that has come up from our beginning conversations from people who are in white-led organizations that really want to do this work, but really are not in the position to necessarily say, hey, let's do this. So is there a place for that within Together SC?
I think there's certainly, we understand that, right? We understand that emerging, and we want to call it emerging leaders, or like you said, people that are on the ground need this training. We offer.
They don't need training. They need opportunity just to be the trainers. I mean, they need to be the chance to be heard.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's a great query, and it's something that we need to do more of. I think in the past with our summit, in particular our summit last year, we found that we had a lot of people, while we had a lot of senior leaders, we also get a lot of people at our summit that are not, that are, on the ground doing the work. And those are the people that we heard from a good bit in our survey last year. And those, that's that dichotomy of, can you do the ground up versus top down approach to this work? And I know we heard from a lot of folks that were really frustrated in the space because they were not the leaders and were unable to feel like they could have any impact, even to the point that some people in the survey said, I don't know if I can work in this organization because of the top. So I think it's an interesting conversation. That's why I'm, was interested to hear what Lindsay had to say, because how do you build a movement within an organization if the top leadership is not there to support it? I don't have the answer, but I went way off tangent from what you asked, Julie, but I do agree that we need to give speaking space and opportunities for others to be working on this work.
Mm-hmm. I think some of it, go ahead, somebody was about to say something really important.
No, it's not that important. I was just thinking, definitely when it comes to small staff and you can feel very isolated and alone and not get that support from the leadership. And I always think, when I hear leadership, definitely in the nonprofit world, I always think of the board. The board has a ton of influence sometimes, good and bad. And so I think that has to be addressed at the same time. But I'm wondering, how do we maybe create a space for the individuals who want to speak up but just don't have that leadership support, a change of how do we bring in people from other organizations to be that outside perspective to push that leadership along and push them out of that comfort zone. Because I mean, all the time in our space, we're like, let's collaborate, let's work together, we're power in numbers. Why can't we do the same approach on racial issues, racial disparities, whatever it may be? Because sometimes it's it's unfortunate that somebody who is within their organizations alone and isolated and is trying to voice their concerns and their own experience, and they're not heard. And you know, it may be a truth, but sometimes it does need to be heard from another person. And if we could connect those channels of the people on this call who are in that executive leadership position to help talk to that other leader and help them get there, of like, what are you doing as your organization? Kind of call them out on it in a friendly, positive, friendly, but also in the truthful, honest, uncomfortable way that may be needed. And that way you can help open that door for that person and that staff to have a stronger voice within their organization.
Also, just to piggyback on what Amber said, I think that having that space to have facilitated conversations. So like you said, maybe I am a few voices with this larger executive staff that won't necessarily hear me. But if maybe Together SC, I know that's what we do here at Midlands Mediation Center, is offering that space for them to come together and everybody be heard in a non-aggressive type way, to say, hey, this is what I've been wanting to say, but I didn't have I didn't have the backing per se, but I want to say this and let it be heard so that they can actually hear what is being felt, and not just say, okay, yeah, because I believe a lot of times people think, oh, that's not us, because nobody gets to say it. Oh, we're not having those issues. Well, that's because you hadn't heard it. So I think having facilitated conversations is really important for and opening that space up. So maybe that's something Together SC could offer, to do that, so that people will, maybe do a survey, maybe some type of something. Who wants to say, who needs a voice, and thinking getting that done.
I think that that's such a good point, because I really do think that when the facilitator is someone that holds the group accountable, often is BIPOC or is Black led in South Carolina a lot, that changes things too. I also think about the ISAs and their graphic, when they are doing kind of taking notes graphically. And I'm sure that we can kind of expand that, where I know there's 2 white women, but I think that there could be expanded to other people. But it'd be nice, I think, in some of these conversations to leave with some images of what we're saying, because a lot of this isn't just talk, and your flip chart doesn't necessarily capture getting us to coalesce around some images of what this might be different. So Yolanda, I don't know if you know Melissa, but it'd be fun to kind of maybe make that connection and see how we can kind of expand some really strong facilitation skills, because I do think that just letting people, giving them space to speak, good facilitator can help people become more comfortable being uncomfortable, I guess.
Oh yeah, exactly. It's important.
Yeah. Our conversation was interesting because we really talked about the legislature. And I think that that's another real, I will just say from my personal experience, but in South Carolina, that is a problem. When the legislature, the people who are making the policy, is really centered in mediocrity and centered in kind of white supremacy, makes it really, really hard. They seem to set the pace. I think we talked a little bit about how funders can kind of do the same, of kind of setting that pace. And so we were kind of discussing, how do you set the pace differently in our group? And Rena, I thought that you talked a lot about kind of just breaking out of the hamster wheel, and I think it was you, maybe it was Kayla, that was talking about just having the conversation about, maybe we need to let go of this funder, or we need to kind of breaking that. And so maybe we could just think a little bit about how do we break our legislator habit and kind of shake that up a little bit.
I think it's saying things that people don't want to hear and being uncomfortable. And in the nonprofit world, like I was in other spaces that I've been having these conversations, it's recognizing again that a lot of the funding streams that we chase after in nonprofit world, the data that we use is, you know, built on racist data points and, you know, white savior complex of how do we address these things. And you as the leadership in your organization need to have a real conversation of, do we want to continue to take these funding streams? Do we want to continue to go after money that we know is perpetuating what we're trying to break? And that's the same conversations that you have with legislators. Are you going to put it out there for what it is, or are you going to continue to be in the hamster wheel?
Yeah, Rena, I think that's really important. I think that definitely funders have a major role that they can play in this conversation when we're talking about racial equity and when we're looking at organizations that we support. And then I know with the Sisters of Charity Foundation, we are definitely just at the beginning of this, but even just trying to find the demographic makeup of the organizations that we support. Not because that is going to determine whether or not we support them, but that's going to give us information that will help to make sure that we're reaching our mission, which is to help those organizations who are helping people who are experiencing poverty, which we know are disproportionately people of color. So the same way we ask nonprofits, how do you evaluate that what you're doing is reaching the people that need it the most? We as foundations need to evaluate what we're doing and making sure that it's actually, that we're reaching the people that we need to reach. So I think foundations can play a major role in this conversation, and in also just showing organizations some of the things that they can do, because it doesn't necessarily need to be a heavy lift to start the process. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, we don't have the right facilitators, or we don't have this, or we don't have that, therefore we can't start. There's always a starting place. You know, we're in the midst of Black History Month. A starting place could be, okay, our organization, next time we have a staff meeting, we want everybody to come to the staff meeting with a Black American that has inspired you, that means something to you, that's important to you for Black history, or come to
Martin Luther King Jr.
Beyond that, or come and say, why is Black History Month important? Or I guess what I'm saying is, it doesn't have to be where you bring in a facilitator to have these heavy, hard conversations. Now, eventually, maybe you'll get to that, but it can be something as simple as, we're celebrating Black History Month, you know, what does that mean to you? Or who do you want to raise up? And maybe try to pick someone that we might not be familiar with. And then you can have a conversation about that.
Erica, I love that idea of, like, I think it's easy to feel like you have to like reinvent your entire system, because you can also, like, once, I think a lot of times for white leaders, like, once you do open your eyes to the injustices happening within your own entity, you can kind of fall down a rabbit hole of like, it's overwhelming, it's so big, I don't know where to start. So that idea of, like, you know, the joke, like, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, is like, how do we take those little steps that eventually lead to big steps? And the little steps can also lead to being strategic about it. I mean, I mentioned in our breakout session that like we just launched our new strategic plan, and racial justice has to be embedded into our strategic plan in order for us to think to the future with that. But before we got to that strategic plan, it was little things. So we're also funders, and with the South Carolina Arts Commission, we're public funders, we're a government entity. But for us, that little thing was like asking a question in the final report to help applicants move their own behavior. It's like, what are you doing in your organization to address DEI? Just that question, even if there are no points attached to it or something like that, we started thinking about like, what are the little things that we can do to help impact behavior and help our grantees think, but it also helps us think about it. So, you know, we were talking about tangible things in our breakout group, like what it can feel so big, but what are the tangible things you can do is those like little bites as you go. And then those little things start to lead to bigger things.
I think that one thing that I really like about that when we get to the show up, and I think that's where we're going, isn't that in this path of getting there, is that bringing forth those voices of people who are, you know, and Rena, I think, you know, I know that as kind of you talked about it, I know that that Kayla and Ashley, Ren, I mean, you know, it's putting, I mean, if to me, the way you break the legislature in a way is to bring the people to the House. I mean, that's kind of what happened in Georgia when you really looked at how they broadened the voting pool, was to go out and give the power to people that were in the street and kind of doing that. And so I do think that that is another side, is really kind of thinking of how are we elevating the voices of people that are impacted. I mean, the people that really are feeling the consequences of things and that can tell that story. And how are we, you know, how are we raising that story always? You know, is there somebody on the board that is your board so focused on fundraising, or is your board focused on the work? And if you can't be, I don't believe that you're focused on the work if they're not people that are receiving the work that are in your conversation. Like, you're not focused on the work, you're focused on your performance of the work, not the work, because the work are the people that need it, and asking them. And one of the things that came up in that mentoring, when we were having this conversation in that mentoring training, was a program that was about teaching reading. And one of the women on the call, she was a part of this program. She was a teacher at the school. She was Black. And one of the students came to her and said, I don't like white people. And you partnered me with my reading buddy who's white, and I'm not comfortable with that. And she was like, how am I going to explain to this woman that this is not going to work? You know, this is a problem. But when she centered the child's voice and she really acknowledged this is what the child is saying, then you start to realize that maybe the white person that was helping, if they're really there about helping the person, maybe their job is to understand the trauma and the experience that the parents have faced, that they've kind of told their children to be nervous about white people, and to figure out, is there something that white person, maybe the white person belongs in the workplace, telling the boss of the people that work there that they need to do a better job treating their employees because it's messing up their child's ability to have assistance in reading. I mean, I think that that's really that centering what's happening on the ground is that, and then also, and in this case, is centering centering Rena, centering Bernie, centering other leaders who are Black leaders that are at the State House trying to figure out how to sell their programs, and putting them in the front and saying, hey, teach us how to sell this program in a way that makes this the normal language and not the language of, well, we don't really talk about poverty in South Carolina. We'd like to talk about, as Amber was saying, we like to talk about the economy. We don't like to talk about poverty because, you know, that's old South Carolina. We're not that anymore. And yet, as long as we do that, we're fighting issues that have nothing to do with South Carolina.
And Julie, I've been thinking with my comment, I kind of misrepresented my organization a little bit. I think, and I was trying to type it in a message, but I'm too slow. So I'm just going to talk about it real quick. One thing we really, really try and do is asset based. I think a lot of times when like storytelling's great, having people's voices in the community and stuff, but they're too often tokenized of like, here's pour them, pull the heartstrings of their sad story. But it's like, no, like they're an asset to the community, to the organization, to the church, whatever they're representing. And I think that's where you got to play out their strengths, show their strengths, but talk about the disparities and the barriers that are still here today, where people are still not able to participate at all or fully participate, and talking about like, we need to work on this. And I think, and the reason we do, yes, it is not fully focused on the economy, but yeah, I think it is still a strength to focus on the economy, because they do play a role in our economy. They do add benefit, because we are, and I'm talking through my lens because we're a community economic development organization, like they add to the tax bracket, they add to our outcomes and stuff. And so they view it as they take away so much because of all the social benefits, and they're like, they take away too much or they don't deserve it, like they can be on their own. But I think that's why we do push it so much, because they are a strength added to the community, and we need to pour in those resources so they can continue to add to it. And that's where I really try to emphasize, like, that's where I'm still working on that, because Bernie is so great at doing that already. And I think, and that's where and so it's like a both and of looking at the assets of a community, showing the disparities and the long injustices while pushing for good policies that benefit all. People have full access to all, and we close that gap. I think we can do both, talking their language, calling the injustice, and pushing for better. And that takes skill that I'm still very early stages learning.
And I want to make sure that I represent my comments from our group in the right way as well. And I centered myself first of all, because as a leader, like as one of the directors on our team, you gave us a compliment, but I wanted to make sure I raised the point that there is that power dynamic struggle of, as a person, because that's what we were discussing, is, am I willing to give up the power that I get from being white in the legislature? Or am I doing lip service? So I'm saying the right things, like Kayla raised up. Am I getting all these trainings? Am I using the language? But when I show up, am I actually showing up? And that's the struggle to which I was raising, is that I feel that within me, that tension all the time. And if I'm truly committed, then I show up and really do it. And if not, I need to learn to get out of the way, because I can't incrementally change while the folks that I work with are hurting. And I just wanted to reflect on that. I was centering like my own leadership position, not specifically talking about the legislators, because they're going to potentially be the same way until their cages get rattled or they get voted out. But me as a leader who says, I believe in this, I have to show up in that way that I say it. Otherwise, I'm just giving lip service. I'm just as bad as they are. And that's what I want to make sure that I raised up about my comments.
Thank you. That's really true. I will say that when we think of the dynamics that are getting in the way, I mean, there are multiple, especially from, like I was just saying before, like a lot of the state organizations really use the dynamics of the legislature as their excuse for why they can stay the way that they are. I mean, it is definitely a thing with that. Erica, you want to you've got some wrap up thoughts?
I guess my only thought is that this work is so important that we cannot wait for everything to be perfect for us to step into it. And every organization is so different. These conversations are wonderful, but at the end of the day, you have to figure out what's going to work for your organization and step into that. And then just on the purely business side of this, taking away that this is the right thing to do, taking away the historical perspective of it. But just on the business side of this, our country is becoming more diverse. We are, within the next, I don't know, 20 years, we're going to be a majority minority company. So these organizations can wait around for this to happen, but they're going to be behind if they do that, because these changes are coming. And I would say now is the time to get ready for them. And thinking that they're not gonna happen, thinking that things can remain the way they have always been, is not realistic. And as a leader, you're supposed to be thinking way beyond for your organization and planning for the future. And you're not really doing that if you are married to the status quo and not wanting to change that. So I think that there's a role that we can all try to play in moving these discussions and actually moving the needle forward.
I think, I guess is the next time we need to, as we kind of keep this moving, then we're kind of starting to look at maybe what is catch up. And so I think that might be something, maybe we can send out a little survey or something to kind of think for where we're going forward, because some of the things that I've heard, I mean, is kind of, do we start focusing on the legislature and advocacy and kind of some understanding the history of our legislature, understanding some of that story, really kind of going through that motion of kind of saying, okay, if we're going to kind of address this impediment, how do we start examining it? The other thing that I also heard was a little bit of kind of a mentoring kind of approach that and that might kind of raise some voices of people that are not necessarily the head of the organizations, but kind of the more of the service, more of the kind of providers in the organization. And so maybe there's a kind of a history look at how that groups are organized, and kind of how we're doing that, what kind of organization is happening at that level, and is there a history of that, and Together SC, is that something that was a decisions that were made not to include that group or to include that group, or kind of how histories of kind of activism or whatever and other of those levels. I mean, because I do think if we kind of are moving through the process, I want to make sure we don't just keep talking about how the issue's an issue and figure out how to move through. But I'd kind of like to know other people's thoughts, and maybe could we go to 10:15 if that's okay, if everybody needs to drop off. I think that's fine. I can't remember exactly how long we had. Debbie?
Yeah, we typically been going to 10:15.
Okay, good. All right, just want to make sure that.
And I wanted to also frame something that conversations we've been having it together. See, this is really good information of how we propel this group forward. And we, Madeline and I, earlier this week, actually had a conversation with our friend Dr. Hackman, with Heather, about ongoing involvement of her, because she sets sort of the framework for this group, as well as is still leading the Racial Equity Lens cohort. And we're talking about starting perhaps in April, sort of a phase 2 of this work, where we actually continue the work that you all are doing, but also bring back the group that's gone through that racial equity cohort to have some other sessions with Dr. Hackman, and actually take some action steps in that. I know this group has been moving toward that, and that's what you're talking about, Julia's framing for next time. But I just wondered if there might be some interest from folks that are on this call today, if they think that would be something they might be interested in participating in, and sort of bringing other voices and other folks that are on this journey together. Didn't mean to distract from what Julie just said, but just this is kind of something that we're in the midst of planning or thinking about planning. Any comments? Yes, no, thumbs down. I know you've gotten a really good rapport going with the 10 or so of you that have met more frequently. The other group is a group of, again, white leaders. That was the focus for that group. This group is a broader, more diverse group, but is there appeal to that, or would you want to stay together as a small cohort, engaging at this level, or perhaps increase that?
This is me and my thoughts, because so my CEO is participating in the other cohort, and so there hasn't, we try to like in our one-on-one time bring together what we're learning, but there hasn't been like true space for us to like put it together. So I don't know if anyone else is in that similar situation. It might be beneficial. So I'm not working, I don't feel like I'm working in a vacuum.
Yeah, and we're trying to get the other group to be more in the vein of where you are as a group, because they were more in a learning cycle, and now trying to onboard them into this process of, okay, now we need to take action. I mean, particularly when we're talking about the things that Julie just highlighted, the legislative component to this, and even with the mentoring and how do you build from within organizations, you know, I think that this group could be really instrumental in doing that.
But I will say that it has led for us to have a lot of tough conversations about what our action steps are, and understanding where the people are in our organization, so that it's not just like, well, yay, we learned all this stuff, now let's do it. Why am I still getting resistance? Here's why. And let's try to figure out what a pathway is to actually making our own steps because of realizing where we are.
Rena, is this group, I mean, have we been a bit of, I mean, have we kind of been a safe space for you to kind of prepare yourself for the conversations with her? I mean, are we just another, I mean, I guess I'm just saying, is there any modeling that we're doing of that kind of mentoring?
I think part of it is me being in this, because I'm having other similar conversations in other groups. So I'm functioning at a higher level and feeling comfortable to talk about this stuff when that's not where everybody else in my organization is. So we're still having to work through some of I'm not comfortable saying this to these white people because I think I'm going to lose my job. Yeah. So I'm comfortable saying it in Black spaces, but how do I say it to leadership who is white to where we can actually move change forward? And some of that balancing is where we're trying to figure out how do we get everybody to have the real conversations on every level. So it's not just happening here at the executive level, when it's not just happening in the caucusing level. And what are those strategies? Because I have some friends who are like, well, we have caucuses now. We have a Slack channel. And then we're in a group chat of, well, I'm not saying what I need to say over the Slack channel because what if they can read it? Because I don't feel comfortable doing that. So it's trying to get that trust comfort level to equate is a big thing of what I'm trying to figure out. How do I bring all these conversations together?
I think that, I mean, I guess, and maybe in some of the history thing is to really acknowledge that people were fired. People did lose their job. People did, that there was kind of that history, the stories have kind of gone around and people knowing, like, what is the history of some of the organization's HR policies in a way to kind of make it so that, we all have our formal language, that we all are performing as we're supposed to perform in this space that kind of closes that down. So I don't know. I mean, are we, I don't want to drive the conversation, but I do think that if we spend some time thinking about kind of the history of how the voices, I don't want to say at the bottom, but the voices of the people that are doing the work gets shut down, that might help us start to figure out how to break from that. I mean, if we're walking the wake up, catch up, show up, clean up, if we're walking that path, and I think we would have to delve into some of that history and those conversations and that. And so I think to me, there is kind of two potential options. And if anybody sees some others, please, I don't want to push the conversation, but it is kind of that raising those voices, which I'm hearing a lot of people say. And then if we wanted to go outside, is really acknowledging some of is maybe like the legislature is another thing, because there is a huge history of the legislature that's interesting, and a whole history of kind of nonprofits not being able to lobby, and kind of how that gets used to kind of keep some of this from happening. So maybe, I'd like to hear y'all's thoughts real quick, or we could just send out a survey and kind of ask if there's we're leaning one direction or the other, and then kind of make a decision. I don't know.
I think the survey sounds like a good idea. Does everyone agree, and you can share your thoughts in that? And Julie, maybe you and I could work on putting a little survey together, and Erica as well, but get your input, a little survey to the group. Does everyone feel like that would be worthwhile? And I can also pose the question of knowing a little more about the structure of what we're thinking about doing with Heather, and just see where the comfort level is, because I really appreciate what Rena was sharing about how you're using this, and how do we become informed from what you've learned through this process, with both of you being in in a different cohort, right? I think that's really it's interesting to me because what we really want to do is build a body of leadership around this issue, and how do we onboard everyone to be in a place together working on it. And I don't know if it was a suggestion by Heather, and I think it's something to definitely look deeper at. So
the other thing is, if we're going to be doing history next time, and we kind of got those two topics, if we can start thinking about who can help us, because I think we might need some historians. I mean, I don't know, we already have some in the group that are just waiting to unleash their truth, but if we know some historians that can kind of, some Black historians, of course, I think that's what we need to do, since we're centering that, is that can talk about kind of employment and kind of the roles of that, and also maybe, or someone that can talk about the legislature and some of the history of the South Carolina legislature.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
If we're inviting folks to come give us labor, is there, I don't know the way that this is structured, but are we going to pay these historians, these people to come give us this knowledge? Because I don't want to be taking labor from other folks, free labor. I'm trying to teach us as a
we don't want to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, are you thinking an outside resource? Is that what you're suggesting, Julie? Or you were saying internally that we use our internal resources from this team to talk about history? There, at this point, there aren't really resources available to pay someone, and I totally agree that we should be, but just being honest about our budget.
I will provide the resources to pay somebody. So we will pay someone. I mean, I think we can. I mean, I can't pay millions of dollars, but I think that we can come up with some sort of way to do that. So I will make that. That'll be my donation to Together SC.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And that's for this group. So do you want, the other thing I was gonna say, are you willing to facilitate that, or do we want to ask someone else from the group to help facilitate that? If you're providing the resources, you may want to do that.
No, I'm not the historian. So.
I mean, I'm looking for, we thank Erica and Julie for hosting the last 2 times. Do I have 2 other volunteers that might want to help work on this for the next session for March? I'm sorry, losing track of the month. Does anyone else want to be helping that? I see Ashley, who's doing 7 jobs at the same time. I saw her raise her eyebrow. I thought maybe that was a yes.
No, the house is in session right now too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I wonder, like, I would be interested in pursuing it too, but I think March feels really soon. And I feel like maybe we need to
give us some space
for that. I feel like the conversation, Rena, that you introduced about sort of building trust within different levels in an organization, I think it's something that we could probably approach sooner, because it's more like in the moment what we're all living and experiencing right now, and it's sort of based on just real life experience. Whereas the conversation about sort of legislative history is going to take some research and some sort of like external forces, and I'm happy to be part of that because we're a state agency, so I'm happy to help take the lead on that. But I think we may need more time than like prepping for the next meeting with that. I don't know. That's just sort of what I'm feeling right now.
Yeah, I think the legislative conversation can go in so many different directions, even depending on like what issue you're talking about. Like we could spend a whole 12 hours talking about reproductive justice and that thing in itself with the RIN folks. So yeah, I don't know how broad or what direction we want to take it in general.
Kayla, we hadn't heard from you. Oh, sorry.
Something that's very broad, but was very eye-opening for me. PBS did a 4-part series on Reconstruction. and it went beyond just like the 15 years after the Civil War. It like went 50, 60 years. And that was fascinating. And they obviously focused a lot on the South and had examples of South Carolina in the legislature, because at one point we actually, during Reconstruction, we had more Black legislators than white at one time. And I was like, fascinating. And then just how that completely switched, just because of the way the policies and stuff. So that was really great to get that foundation piece for me, and the generational effect it has and continues to play out in our systems. And so that could be something we all can do on our own time. I love documentaries, and PBS is great. And so I think if it's free, I think it's just called Reconstruction, America after the Civil War. I think I just pulled it up, so I'll put that in there. But yes, I think I completely agree that we could do a lot more work to have some more focused stuff of like current climate understanding, and then also looking from the employer's perspective of how people are fearful of losing their jobs, because there's a history of that and we have to recognize that.
Erica,
are you muted?
Yeah, I agree. I think that conversation would be wonderful, but I think that maybe we do need a little bit more time to determine the parameters of the conversation, because what Amber was saying about Reconstruction, and that period of time, we're seeing a little bit of that right now as well with what's going on with our voting, with all these voting laws being put back into place after we had such a tremendous turnout of Black people and people of color for this last election. And I think there could be a really good conversation about this is just really history repeating itself once again. And what does that look like? And then what can we as a sector possibly do about it?
Kayla, you any thoughts? Oh. She wants to wait. Yolanda? No? It does sound like maybe that I think that legislature, I'm telling you, it's an issue. We're going to have to deal with it at some point. So, but I do think maybe we can practice with the employment stuff and really kind of thinking about kind of the history of that. I know Dr. Cleo Brown's someone I really respect, and she could be really, I know she's really thought about kind of, I've heard her speak a little bit of the experience of kind of how the conversations has moved, like talking about race in the organization, and how many times she sat through seminars where they would talk about race, and but you weren't allowed to say anything. And then it was like, let's all feel good and have this feel good moment, and kind of how frustrating that could be. So maybe she can kind of talk about how race is talked about in the workplace and the history of that, and kind of how that's burned people in the past, and they are kind of maybe are hesitant before, and think about that. If that's something, then maybe we can bring her back to, she certainly is capable of kind of facilitating the conversation, and Eric and I can kind of work with her to maybe kind of lead that, and I can help kind of compensate her for it.
Are you talking about for the next session or? I know we've lost a few people along the way, so we probably need to wrap up, but if that's approach, I can talk to you and Erica offline if that's something that everyone else would appreciate. And I know Cleo could do it. I think she could do a fantastic job. If that's the next step, that would be
okay. And Yolanda's now, now I know about Yolanda's
I'd like to learn more about what
experience. I think we might need to throw your friend up in some leadership. So I'm looking, maybe we can help. Maybe you can help co-facilitate with Cleo.
I would love to learn more about what Midlands Mediation is doing and how we build upon that. Yolanda, maybe that's something we could include in our next session.
Okay.
Does that make sense, Yolanda?
Do you mind being put on the spot?
Sure, why not? So yeah, we can all talk about it. That'll be great.
Okay, great.
I'd like to learn more. So,
well, they didn't just throw it on Eric and I. We can meet with you, and we won't just throw you to the wolves. So
Thank you.
okay.
That'd be great. So, okay, so we'll work on from today going forward. Erica and Julie and I have a little bit of work to do, a little survey, and we're going to see how we format the next session and what might be a good way to keep this conversation moving. Because gosh, this group has really got something, it's really got some momentum with these conversations. We just need to keep it focused. So, well, thank you all for joining us today, and thank you again to Erica and Julie for your dedication to this group and working through it, and to the others that have participated. And we like our little additional, the person that's been entertaining us in the background throughout this session, because it's like a mini me of you when you were holding, oh, you look like twins. So we appreciate that. Just bring a little brightness to our day, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone in March at the next session, which I, of course, didn't pull up the date. Let me just do it real quick before we leave. Does everyone
Can I
have?
make a request, Debbie?
Yes.
Do you mind sending us a calendar hold? I need to be honest of why I was late today is because my inbox is terrible during the legislative session. So I got your reminder, but it didn't get read. So this morning had Kayla did labor for me and said, here's the information. And that shouldn't be Kayla's job. I need to make sure my calendar's up to date. So I will do a calendar invite, and I'll do it to the entire group, recognizing that this is probably the group that's going to attend, but I'll do it to everybody. As I'm looking at the date, is actually March 11th is the next time we're scheduled to meet. So, well, very good, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for being here and having such a really great dialogue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay.